From a disintegrated spaceship to a car-melting skyscraper, today we look at the most expensive mistakes in history. Number 11. Old guitar. The first expensive mistake award goes to Kurt Russell. That's correct, this actor was on set filming for Quentin Tarantino's The Hateful Eight with Jennifer Jason Leigh. During the scene, Leigh's character is playing guitar when Russell snatches the instrument out of her hands. He proceeds to bash it to pieces against a wooden pillar. But what is the issue here? He was just acting, right? Well, yes, Russell was simply doing his job. However, the guitar he took from Leigh was an 1860s Martin that was on loan to them from the Martin Guitar Museum. He thought that the relic had been replaced with a dummy guitar. So, he was stunned to find out that the guitar he had just broken into pieces was the $40,000 antique. Since Leigh loved the guitar so much, Quentin Tarantino gifted her an 1880s Martin after filming. Nevertheless, there was no way to return the shattered 1860s instrument to its former glory. All in the name of art, right? Number 10. Spanish submarine. Although submarines are supposed to be submerged in water, they are also meant to come up eventually. However, a Spanish submarine called the Isaac Peral was facing some serious issues in 2013 when people discovered it was approximately 75 tons too heavy. The Spanish Navy had commissioned 4 of these vessels for about 2.2 billion euros, or approximately 2.5 billion US dollars. The mistake allegedly stemmed from miscalculations during the engineering stage of the submarine, and notedly could have prevented it from resurfacing. To compensate for the extreme weight excess, the best option was to lengthen the vessel. The cost to do this was estimated at 7.5 million euros, or about 8.6 million US dollars per meter. In addition to the extra cost for the new submarine, they were forced to keep the older ones working at about 15 million euros or 17 million US dollars per year. Number 9. Lost spacecraft. NASA's Mars Climate Orbiter was launched in December 1998, and its purpose was to study the climate, atmosphere, and surface changes of Mars. In September 1999, Trajectory Correction Maneuver 4 was initiated. Its intention was to place the spacecraft in a position that would transport it around Mars to about 140 miles above the planet's surface in its orbit. However, the maneuver ended up placing the orbiter at an altitude of about 68 miles, much lower than it was meant to be. Further calculations made after the failure indicated that the spacecraft's course most likely took it approximately 35 miles above Mars, where it is thought to have disintegrated due to the stress of the atmosphere. They later discovered that a portion of the ground software was provided by Lockheed Martin, which used United States customary units instead of SI units, aka the metric system. So, due to a simple mistake with clashing software, NASA lost its $125 million orbiter. Number 8. Unclaimed jackpot. Have you ever purchased a lottery ticket because you were feeling lucky? Maybe you drove to the gas station and picked one up because the jackpot was massive. Whatever the case, people buy lottery tickets all the time without truly believing they're going to win. This exact thing happened to a British woman in 2010, whose name remains undisclosed. She stated to Coventry Telegraph, "I play every week. I play the lottery, the Euro Millions, and the Thunderball. But my husband takes the ticket off me and I don't see it again. That's why I always write my numbers down." Just like every other week, she bought a ticket and wrote the numbers down on another piece of paper so she'd remember them. However, this time, when her husband took the ticket, he threw it in the trash. When the prize remained unclaimed for about a week, she compared her numbers and found out that she would have won. How much was the jackpot, you ask? It was $181 million. I wonder if these two are still married. Number 7. Liquid vehicles. Would you ever expect after parking your car that you could come back to a melted vehicle? Probably not. However, in 2013, London's walkie-talkie skyscraper was blamed for the melting of a man's Jaguar. The man, Martin Lindsay, parked his car on Eastcheap on a Thursday afternoon. When he went back to the vehicle about 2 hours later, he discovered that parts of the Jaguar had melted, including the side mirror and emblem. At that time, the walkie-talkie, named for its peculiar shape, was under construction. Allegedly, the light bouncing off the tower formed a magnified beam that liquefied parts of the car. The company suspended the construction of 3 parking bays that were supposed to be built in the area while the situation was investigated. The damage to Martin Lindsay's Jaguar was about $1,200. However, the walkie-talkie tower notedly melted other cars and shops with its destructive glare. So, in 2014, they began the construction of a permanent sunshade that put an end to the skyscraper's devastating beams. Number 6. Bankrupt. In 1992, a man named Nick Leeson was appointed as general manager of a futures markets operation for the Singapore International Monetary Exchange, or SIMEX. Barings Bank, the oldest in the United Kingdom, had a seat on SIMEX, which didn't initiate until Leeson was transferred there. He didn't have a broker's license in the UK due to falsehoods on his application, and neither he or Barings Bank disclosed the information when he applied for one in Singapore. Leeson was pulling in significant profits for the bank in 1992, totaling about £10 million or $13 million US. He even earned a bonus of about £130,000 or $170,000 US at the end of that year. However, shortly after, he used an error account at Barings to keep his losses secret. He continued using this account to hide others and later claimed that he hadn't used it to benefit himself. But investigators eventually discovered he had about $35 million in numerous bank accounts. By the end of 1994, he had caused Barings to lose approximately £208 million, or about $272 million US. The losses eventually totaled about £827 million, or $1.3 billion US. Barings Bank was ultimately declared bankrupt in 1995. What happened to Leeson, you ask? Well, after fleeing to various countries, he was eventually caught and sentenced to 6.5 years in Singapore's Chiang Rai prison. However, he was released in 1999 when a colon cancer diagnosis suggested he didn't have much time to live. Despite the severity of the disease, Leeson survived. Seems this tricky guy can escape just about anything. Number 5. Russia sells Alaska. In 1867, the Alaska Purchase took place between the United States and Russia. Edward de Stockel, the Russian minister in Washington at the time, proposed the sale of the land for $7.2 million. William Seward, the U.S. Secretary of State, agreed to the offer, and President Andrew Johnson signed the treaty in May of that year. For about 30 years after buying Alaska, the United States didn't pay much attention to the area because of its changing government and overall unsteadiness. However, after the remaining Russian inhabitants left the state, American settlers who believed there were riches to be found there rushed over. In 1896, the Klondike Gold Rush began in Alaska, earning the United States hundreds of millions of dollars. The U.S. continued to profit from the purchase through gold, oil, and timber, among other resources. The Russian people never thought selling the territory was a good idea, and they mostly did so out of necessity. Nevertheless, they probably regretted it even more when they found out its true worth. Number 4. Nuclear event. Another extremely expensive historical mistake was the 1986 Chernobyl nuclear event. A systems test was ongoing in April of that year when there was an abrupt power surge. Operators tried to initiate an emergency shutdown. However, when they did this, another sudden power surge occurred. This second output of power caused a reactor vessel to rupture as well as a string of steam explosions. After that, the graphite moderator became exposed to the air and caught on fire. For an entire week, the radioactive fallout was launched into the atmosphere, which drifted into significant areas of Europe and the Western Soviet Union. They had to rapidly evacuate 49,000 people from Pripyat and 68,000 more from other cities, including Chernobyl. The total number of people that were relocated was about 335,000. The amount of fallout was partially because the reactor hadn't been inside a sturdy containment vessel. The Soviet Union spent approximately 18 billion rubles, the equivalent of US dollars at the time, for decontamination and containment, thus exhausting all of its assets. The Belarus government spent a total of about 235 billion US dollars over 30 years. Number 3. Bitcoins. This historical mistake wasn't quite as severe as Chernobyl. However, it did lose a poor soul a whole lot of money. In 2013, a man named James Howells accidentally trashed his computer, which contained about 7,500 bitcoins. If you don't know, Bitcoin is a form of cryptocurrency. Howells' bitcoins were worth about $4 million at that time. You're probably asking, why in God's name would he throw that computer away? The answer is that he did it by mistake. He had taken the PC apart and stored the hard drive in a drawer in 2010. It sat in the same spot for 3 years when he tossed it into a bin at a landfill. Nowadays, Howells' bitcoins would be worth approximately $108 million. He attempted to convince local authorities to let him search for his hard drive at the landfill. However, he hasn't yet been granted permission. Number 2. Collapsed bridge. Another terrible event was the collapsing of Song-Su Bridge over the Han River in Seoul, South Korea. The bridge was built by Dong-A Construction, one of the country's most significant industrial companies. It was designed to hold vehicles that weighed no more than 36.3 tons. However, they began allowing loads that were over 47.3 tons across the bridge. On a busy morning in October 1994, 15 years after it was built, a massive portion of Seongsu Bridge collapsed. There were 10 cars, 1 van, and 1 commuter bus on that section when it fell into the river below. Not only did the country lose millions of dollars, but the lives of many citizens were lost as well. 32 people passed away and 17 were injured. Number 1. Lost Lake. In November 1980, an oil rig drilled into a salt mine under Lake Peigneur in Louisiana due to a misunderstanding of the coordinate reference system. A 14-inch drill bit punctured the mine, resulting in a whirlpool. It sucked in 11 barges, the drilling platforms, numerous trees, and about 65 acres of surrounding land. Despite the insane event, all 55 of the employees successfully fled. The once freshwater lake turned to saltwater when water from Vermilion Bay and the Del Cambre Canal flowed in. The incident was due to miscalculations by Texaco, which had contracted the oil rig. Texaco ended up having to pay $32 million to Diamond Crystal Salt Company, which owned the mine, and $12.8 million to a plant nursery that was within the vicinity. Not only did it cost them a ton of money and time, but they also changed the entire ecosystem when saltwater was introduced.